I think we're recording. Lovely. All right. So, hi, my name is Olivia Marshall. I am the VP of Public Issues for the Louisville Young Democrats, and I'm here with Roberto Raldano. Is that correct?
Roberto Roldan. Close. Just
Damn,
good.
sorry. It's been a day. Just will you briefly introduce yourself and explain kind of why we invited you here?
Sure, yeah. My name is Roberto Roldan. I cover city politics and government for WFPL or Louisville Public Media. We're the NPR affiliate here in Louisville. As part of covering local politics and government, I cover a lot of Metro Council, the mayor's office, city departments, including the jail and the police department. I'm pretty intimately familiar with Louisville Metro Council and sort of the budget process. I've also covered budgets and local government in Richmond, Virginia, and in Tampa, Florida. Yeah, it's fun. I enjoy it.
You're basically an expert on local
Well,
city
yeah,
and stuff. So it's really nice because on the flip side, I am not a numbers person. And I wanted to do this event because I saw the proposed budget, which is now passed. And I was like, I don't know what any of this means. So I'm really glad that I was allowed to put on this event and kind of help people like me who are not numbers or budget people kind of understand. And I also just want to state that the Louisville Public Media is an editorially and independent and is a nonpartisan media organization. The participation of Roberto Roldan in this event hosted by the Louisville Young Dems does not reflect the opinions of our guests or of the Louisville Public Media. This is basically just going to be his insights, as well as yeah, basically. Yeah, so we're gonna go jump into this. It's really fun. um uh, so sorry about that. All right, so we're looking at, where does the money reside? I heard that this is a popular TikTok audio or something.
yeah.
uh I'm not hitting cool with the kids. God. Yeah, so we're going to be examining the Louisville Metro budget, and based on what we see from the community side, like what is wanted and what has been talked about um, for years and so on and so forth, and the priorities that are then kind of outlaid or kind of seen from Metro Council in terms of, we hear you. These are actually what we're going to prioritize. That is the YouTube video. I'm not going to play it. All right. So today the agenda is going to look like, we're going to go over the process. We're going to talk about the people, uh, the budget, essentially how we can get involved, and the importance of voting, which I hopefully we all know, and then any resources to kind of get more information about it as well. And then we will jump into our discussion at the end. All righty. So the process of the Metro budget is fun. So it basically takes almost 6 months, 6, 7 months, starts in April, around the second Metro Council meeting, and they do hear feedback. Um, but this year they only had one, like, public comments meeting, which is odd because last year they had two, which I'll mention again later. Um, and then they'll go over it, do all the fun committee stuff, and then in June, they will vote on it, like they did last Tuesday, and then it's implemented on July 1st, and then starts back again in November, and then back in November, that's when kind of the discussion starts again. Okay, where do we want to see where our tax dollars go to? What do we want to see really prioritized in the next fiscal year. And the people, how are we played into this? So there's a bunch of different people who are involved within the process, both directly and indirectly. So the mayor's administration and the Metro Council are definitely the ones who are more so the directly involved people. That includes like the mayor, the council members, city departments, related agencies that kind of fall under the umbrella of what may be covered under the budget. And then indirectly, or sometimes directly, if you want to get involved, that includes people like you, me, everyone in this chat, all that fun stuff, advocacy groups, community organizations, and anybody who is directly affected by any policies or budgets passed by the council. So the budget itself, it's an over $1.1 billion budget, which is crazy. And we see the two aspects of the budget coming from two different things, a general fund and then the capital budget. And the general fund is kind of like the main honcho of it all. It comes from property and payroll taxes. And so that's mainly the source of the budget. And we can see here how the general funding aspect is split up. And this is directly from the Metro Council's published overview of the budget. So this isn't like a secondary source or anything. This is directly from them showing how they cut up the money. And kind of, it shows a little bit of their priorities, but not really, because some of those are broad. So breaking down the numbers though, we see that the Louisville Metro Police Department has a budget of $222 million this year. And they're not really too direct with what exactly that means, besides like a few different things. And I think Roberto, you'll get into that. And then but it's definitely a large number that kind of raises eyebrows. And then we kind of see the differences between that aspect of public safety and then other social programs like the Public Health and Wellness Department, Free Public Library, codes and regulations, and external agency funds. Kind of see that stark difference there. And then here's another graph, kind of see it more visually, the obvious, like the just astounding differences in how they've allocated the budget. And here, external agency fund is a kind of broad name. So I went in and I broke up like what kind of different programs and community organizations and stuff fall under it. And we can kind of see here that the budget allocation for those things versus the police department. So things like crisis response and crisis unit case management are not as well funded as the police department. And then voting is important because, as we all know, it helps get your voice in the system and helps get people who may have the same opinions and ideas as you into office so they can implement it. The registration deadline for the general election is Tuesday, October 10th, and you can do that at govoteky.com. And then some engagement opportunities, because it's not really, they're not really great at advertising the budget process too much. So ways we can get involved are going to the mayor and Metro Council kind of directly with mailing, emailing, calling, social media, that kind of jazz. Go to the public hearings. There's also public comment forums online. And I think they were up until mid June. Organizing and then protests are also effective ways to kind of engage with the process itself. Here are some resources. We'll link those as well in the when we post the video, so you guys can have that there. And then now it's our discussion time. So I just spoke for a really long time, and basically, let me stop sharing my screen here. All right. So essentially, I want this discussion to kind of be like bouncing back and forth between us. You know, not anything too intense. So let me see here. So I guess my first question to you would be, based on your coverage of Louisville over the past year, and kind of following the development of this budget, what kind of community priorities or issues do you see that are reflected in the budget that people have spoke up about? Does it address any of the actual concerns that people have brought up within the past year or so, like with infrastructure, public health, safety, etc.?
Sure, yeah. I guess it's tough when you say community priorities because I think Louisville Metro is such a large and diverse community, diverse in a lot of different ways, including sort of politically and what people want, to be the priority of their local government. I'd say we've heard a lot from city officials and community leaders about public safety, especially in light of the gun violence crisis and the increase in violent crime that we've seen during the pandemic. I think the approach that Mayor Greenberg has taken is sort of, I guess, a both and type of approach. So LMPD's budget increased this year by about 2%. It's still obviously the single largest department by spending, I think, as you noted. There's money to hire an outside recruitment firm to help them fill about 300 officer vacancies that they currently have. But there's also some additional funding for non-police public safety strategies like the 911 deflection program, which sends out social workers to respond to some emergency calls where people are having like a mental health crisis. And there's also funding for community center programs and other types of programs that are aimed at young people who have disproportionately been involved in some of the violent crimes. So, I'm not here to say whether that approach is right, but I think that's kind of been the approach that we've seen him take with the first budget is kind of sort of a both and in terms of funding the police department for public safety, but also non-police responses.
And that falls under the budget of the LMPD.
Um, Sort of. I mean, so the police response would fall under LMPD's budget.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
200 million. And that's where you see kind of the increase from last year. But the rest, honestly, I don't know where the 911 deflection program funding sits. My guess would be like emergency services.
Yeah.
But things like community center programming, community centers are under Parks and Rec. Some of the programs are under the Office of Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods. So yeah, that's where I think the budget can kind of get a little confusing. Yeah, I mean, are there other priorities you'd like me to talk about? I mean, I can talk about
No, I mean,
parks.
just like what you've kind of seen. I know you released an article last week, I believe, about housing. And that is my policy area of interest. So
Sure.
I think when I was looking at it, there was a decrease in funding for housing departments in the city. I could be reading that wrong as well.
Yeah,
What's
yeah.
what did you see?
So yeah, it's tricky. So I'll say one of the big sort of like non-money related things that the Greenberg administration did with this specific budget is kind of a reorganization of Louisville Metro. So they've reorganized and created new departments, new offices. They've moved some offices into kind of different areas of city government, sort of elevated some offices into the mayor's office. And so that made it so it's kind of tricky to do in some instances, it's kind of tricky to do a direct comparison to last year. You know, I don't know. I think that's not particularly helpful for members of the public, but that's, just kind of the document that was produced by the Office of Management and Budget. So yeah, it makes that tricky. I don't think that there was really a net decrease to housing. I think when we're looking at the city's contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, that was about $15 million, which historically I think is it's not a huge increase over last year. I believe it's actually this, it might be the same as last year. It might be a little bit more. The last few years, I think it's historically been around $10 million. But there was a very long period of time after the Affordable Housing Trust Fund was first created that the city didn't really make any contribution to it at all. So yeah, I think there's more funding when we talk about affordable housing. There's an additional 2 million roughly, I think, for affordable housing preservation. So, continuing to keep affordable housing at these sort of lower rental rates. But yeah, I think you probably were reading that right, but the way that they have it is a little tricky this year.
Yeah, that I guess that really goes to my point of like, I see these numbers and they look like numbers, but they're not really too clear on exactly kind of what goes where and how it actually gets used, which is confusing. They have a little section up at the top that's like, this is what this goes to, but it doesn't actually like go too in depth about it, which is frustrating to say the least. But I understand they only have so many character limits in everything. So like you've kind of touched on it, and that kind of goes into my next question of like, where where will we see the money actually go towards? Like, is there anything that like kind of sticks out in your mind as like, oh, this is like a really interesting way that they're allocating the budget this year? Because, you know, money and words and promises are one thing, but like actually like implementing and doing something is much different than in reality.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I guess firstly, I mean, I think the point that you made about it being kind of confusing, I think is a good point. Because, you know, for better or for worse, I think a lot of things when it comes to local government are sort of not very upfront. I think a lot
Yeah.
of the processes can be pretty complicated. And I
It's
don't know that it
like
necessarily
back
needs to be
doors,
though.
like
Yeah.
hush meetings, like you, like everyone kind of like you know, only like kind of a select few people like talk to each other, that type of deal. I grew up in a small town, so that's kind of like what my experience is with local government is. So moving to Louisville kind of was a huge shift, but go on, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think you're right. I think, in specifically within the context of the budget, there's not the public is not necessarily privy to a lot of the conversations that go into the mayor's initial budget. Essentially a budget is sort of just a statement of priorities. And so, to some extent we know sort of what the mayor at any given time, what their priorities are. But it's folks in the Office of Management and Budget. It's sort of his senior advisors and senior staff. They're the ones that are having all these conversations, and department heads about what's going to go into that initial proposal is not something that's really talked about publicly. And then Metro Council has these budget hearings where everybody from the heads of every department have to come and kind of justify why they might have a budget increase that year. A lot of the times they get yelled at by Metro Council members who are having issues over the past year with their department. But they kind of show up at this meeting that happened, I think, last week, or the week. No, it was last week. This meeting that happens when Metro Council comes out and has this big list of amendments to the mayor's budget that they're then going to vote on. The conversations that kind of led up to how we got to those set of amendments and how we're changing the mayor's budget those are conversations that are happening more informally with Metro Council members amongst each other and are not necessarily happening in public. So I think there it's difficult. I think you're right. It's kind of difficult to always know exactly what is going into some of the things that are being proposed, because a lot of those conversations don't necessarily happen in public.
Yeah. I think that's a very frustrating thing for um especially like trying to kind of tear down the walls between like constituents and policymakers and those who are elected officials because they're especially like within like a larger metro area there's like almost a little bit of a disconnect and there's people who attempt to kind of bring us together and kind of make it more involved process and that stuff. But there always seems to be little hiccups kind of like with this where it is they're going on the right track to some degree, but at the same time, when you don't give people and like the information, like it's more informal, then how are people actually supposed to, be involved? And I mean, is there anything about like the process itself? I mean, you kind of talked about like how it's been informal and stuff, but is there anything that like you would change about it? And kind of
Yeah.
make a more towards what you would think would be ideal?
Yeah. I mean, like, obviously, when it comes to policy, like, I'm not here to kind of tell you the policy decisions that you make, but I think when it comes to, one of the things that I don't mind being an advocate for is like transparency, and the ability of the public to participate in the process. And, I would say you talked about there only being one meeting or two. I mean, I think, the opportunities for public feedback are pretty inadequate during the Metro Council process. They have this form, but okay.
How do we know we're actually going to see it? Like,
Yeah, I mean, there were some interesting things that were done during the ARP, the American Rescue Plan process, where there was, a lot of data that was collected from these community surveys, and they were presented to Metro Council members in a way where Metro Council members understood, how the folks who were responding, what their priorities were, what they wanted to spend money on, and then even got to a more granular level. And I think something like that, perhaps there's that data analysis happening on the back end. We just don't know about it, but I thought that that was pretty helpful. I know that when a mayor presents their budget in April, they do provide Metro Council members with a breakdown, essentially department by department of like, this department, we're changing the name to this and we're moving some of the money from this department to another. They tell them, where if a department is getting an increase in their budget, they'll say, here's, 500,000 in additional funding for this, a certain amount of money being cut from this. But that's not something that the public gets. That's something that Metro Council members get because,
yeah,
they want them to make an informed decision. But I mean, I'd argue that it becomes hard for members of the public to make a formal or a good decision and holding their elected officials accountable and what they ask for without something like that. So, yeah, I mean, I think in general, and this isn't about a specific elected official,
yeah,
but it's like I think every elected official, even if they don't mean it, will when they come into public office, they say, we want to do more to engage the community and give the community a bigger voice. Um, I think there are some people who will just tell you like we're doing the best we can, but I don't necessarily believe that's true. I think there are a lot of things that they could be doing better. And I feel like that's one thing that the public should definitely demand is that they do a better job of explaining a lot of these complicated processes and explaining their decisions, so that we in the public can make a more informed decision, especially when it comes to stuff that's as sort of opaque as the budget.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like I would see maybe they could argue that releasing, the stuff that they give to the council members may be confidential, that type of thing. But there's always ways to redact. And also, yeah, there's ways around that where you can still give people more information, maybe not as much as you give the people like up in front and stuff like that, but there's still more that can be done. Um And I think this all kind of leads back to people just wanting to improve Louisville, and kind of see it flourish and grow as we know and love it to. And you know, we were into the idea of comparing, contrasting ourselves to others. It's human nature. And comparing Louisville to other nearby metro cities that have also seen growth and development, like Nashville and Cincinnati. Um, you know, how is our budget kind of like comparing to theirs? Like, are we spending the money in the kind of right places where they are in terms of that? I mean, maybe that's not the right way to ask it, but like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, like, how are we making Louisville to be more attractive to young people who want to come in and kind of settle down and develop a family and career here? Um,
Yeah. I mean, I think in the context of this, most recent budget, um, I think in some of the conversations that Metro Council members had, I think that there was a recognition by some Metro Council members that one of the things that, needs to be done in order to make Louisville an attractive city, in this day and age is, an increase in investing more in alternative modes of transportation, including public transit.
yeah,
I don't know that this budget necessarily addressed that in a meaningful way. I mean, there was there was an increased investment in roadway infrastructure, but a lot of that was in road repaving. There was a little bit of investment in alleyways. I don't know that that is really what we're getting at. The investment in sidewalks and bike lanes, a lot of that I think was mostly stayed pretty flat. In part, some of that stuff depends on grants from the state. So that's kind of a tricky part. But yeah, I would say overall it was sort of just a continuation budget as it relates to public transit. There was a lot of talk about Metro Council members being upset about TARP service cuts, particularly in the more suburban parts of the county. And I think one Metro Council member took that opportunity to remind everyone that the funding model for TARC has not changed in decades. So that's not necessarily something that you're going to address with a single budget, but I don't know that this budget necessarily moved us any closer in terms of adequately funding our public transportation. One thing I think Mayor Greenberg has talked a lot about is reinvesting in downtown. Obviously, our downtown area was hit pretty hard by COVID, and hasn't necessarily rebounded. This budget was a bit, I think, of a mixed bag there too. Mayor Greenberg initially proposed putting $8 million into a downtown revitalization fund. But Metro Council ended up cutting that by about $5 million.
yeah,
The city, did just put out an RFP a couple of months ago, trying to get developers to turn some vacant lots and parking lots downtown into housing. So, there's that. But, I think one of the big things, and this is probably a plus for most people. I don't know a lot of people who hate public parks, but there.
I mean, who wouldn't? All right, so we were talking about public
keeping
parks
up
and how
keeping up
people
with
hate
our
them.
scarcity.
Yeah, everyone hates
Yeah.
public parks and they're just a detriment to society.
Yeah, well, so yeah, I guess that was the last point I wanted
Yeah.
to touch on, just in terms of keeping up with peer cities. Is
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know very many people that hate public parks, but uh, I'll reserve uh, value judgments on that. But the one thing that is in this budget, and it was sort of a combined effort of Mayor Greenberg and Metro Council, is there is more money for public parks, particularly deferred maintenance. So essentially, there's a huge backlog of needed maintenance and renovations in public parks. A good chunk of that is that historically the city of Louisville has spent next to nothing per person on public parks compared to our peer cities, even Lexington, which is a
Yeah.
smaller city, spends more per resident on their public parks. So, in some ways, I think this budget starts moving in the direction of addressing that. There's about 500, I want to say $500,000 specifically for deferred maintenance in public parks. And it's along the lines with the plan that a city adopted. It was a plan started by a community group called Parks for All. Um, the plan essentially is sort of outlines a way for the city to invest more in public parks and do it in a way that's that is equitable, where it's not just investing in Olmsted parks or investing in parks in sort of whiter, richer neighborhoods, but investing in parks in working class communities, and investing in sort of non-Olmsted parks that kind of have different alternative sources of funding from the Olmsted Parks Conservancy that other public parks don't have. So there is more funding for parks, and I think that having green spaces that are renovated, that are safe, that are accessible. Those things are definitely something that seems like it would help us keep up with our peer cities.
Yeah, for sure. And like kind of touching back on a point way long ago with like the affordable housing and like putting money towards making sure those rates, rent and everything like that are low, is also a great way to encourage people to come in, because if they can't afford the rent, how are they going to like be persuaded to move in? And then what you said about how they cut back, what Mayor Greenberg proposed for like investing in the downtown, that's very interesting to me, because it it would seem like, I mean, I'm not I'm not a money person, not really a business person, but it seems to me that wouldn't it be a good idea to invest in an area and then let that money recoup itself? I mean, isn't that what investments are all about? I mean, I'm from Northern Kentucky, so I've seen Cincinnati kind of go through their recent developments with the banks and everything like that. And Finley Market, OTR, that stuff. And it actually has worked. Like the progress that I've seen from when I was growing up to now, it's a stark difference. Like there's actually like people actually want to go to Cincinnati now, which is crazy. Nobody wanted to go. Everyone loves going to the banks and everything. And I guess people want to see that for Louisville too. And it's kind of disappointing to see when they're like, actually, no, we want to not invest as much into downtown and kind of rejuvenating it in a way, putting a new layer of paint on it, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was about 8 million. They cut it by five, so I think the downtown revitalization fund, which I think is a new fund, only got about 3 million, but it's more than zero. I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, I think budgets are about priorities. There was a meeting I remember watching, a Metro Council meeting
Oh, that must be
months ago, and
fantastic.
someone said, you know they were basically arguing that it's not sort of an either or, that it can be a both and I think that's not I think that's not true, really. I don't really know a nicer way to say it, but I mean, I think that that's not true, and I think budgets show us that if you're funding one thing, that necessarily, like, budgets are finite. It's
Yeah.
not, there's not an infinite amount of money. So if you want to fund something elsewhere in the budget, you have to pull money from somewhere else. Sometimes, at the last minute, folks from OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, come in and say, well, actually, we revised our projections and there's more money, which is what happened this year. But that doesn't mean you're going to find the amount of money that you want to put to something else. So, I would say to some extent, I don't know, there's still some more money for downtown. And I don't know that it was necessarily Metro Council saying,
Yeah.
we don't think that it's worthwhile to invest in downtown, but maybe they thought it was more worthwhile to invest in other places. But I think you're right. I mean, I think, I when I go to Cincinnati, I go to like OTR in the
Yeah.
downtown area. So, I think, yeah, I think it's clear that for years now, downtown Louisville has needed some help. And I think with work from home and the amount of vacancies in office buildings, there's a lot of challenges in downtown Louisville. And clearly it needs some more investment, and whether that's going to come from the public sector or
Yeah.
from the private sector, I think remains to be seen. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Some of development is not necessarily about the city putting money towards something. It's about the city, puts a lot of effort into attracting
Yeah.
businesses to locate here. Trying to entice developers to build more in a specific area. So that's not necessarily something that's going to show up on the budget,
Yeah.
um, but it'll be something to keep an eye out for.
Yeah. Kind of see, where they choose to fund, like what type of things they choose to fund, because like as you said, it's not going to be black and white. Like investing in downtown Louisville here streets, like you're going to see that through the different departments and so on and so forth. And I think that also just goes back to like the transparency aspect. And with people, like it may not necessarily have been Metro Council's decision to cut back that 5 million, but that's what people would assume because they think that they're the ones who are making the final say. And just basically trying to clear up and like make this make it less complex in a way, like for just average everyday voters, is probably something that I think they need to potentially like think about in order to get more people civically engaged, because I think that's the ultimate goal, is to have people actually be invested and participate in politics to a certain degree.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, my pitch, like I said, I covered state and local politics for
Yeah.
almost 5 years, and um, I can't stress enough how important I think it is to be part of the process.
Yeah.
Uh, if you're looking for where elected officials make decisions that directly impact people's daily lives, I mean, that doesn't happen anywhere more, in my opinion, than at the local and state politics at that level. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people are more focused on national politics until they have a problem with their alleyway lighting, or the bus service sucks,
Yeah.
or the park near their house where they want to take their family is having issues with crime or needs renovation, um, stuff like that. So I think there are obviously big things happening
Yeah.
at sort of the state and the federal level, but there's a lot of decisions about sort of your everyday quality of life that happen at the local level. That's why I do my job, but I
Yeah.
think that's also why it's really important for people, to stay local. And I think too, because there is not as many people that are engaged in the local level, I think that gives the people who do stay engaged and who are, community groups who are making that ask for funding from the city, who do know sort of what's going on in the process, that gives them kind of an outsized role. Local elected officials are always, I think officials at any level sometimes are also always looking for feedback from the public.
Yeah.
And if you only have a few dozen people that you regularly hear from, that's going to be your feedback. That's going to inform the decisions that you make, both in policy and in funding. And so, I think that's bad, right? I think
Yeah.
it's not good that
Don't
a
want to create an echo
few
chamber.
select, well, that, and it's like it's not necessarily good that if only a few select people have kind of an outsized voice and an outsized power. But I mean, I think that that's also at the same time a pitch for why you should get involved and want to be part of the process and stay in the know about what's going on because you can have a lot of power and control at the local level if you just sort of understand what's going on and advocate for certain policies or advocate for certain funding for different issues or different groups because there are so few people that are
Yeah.
doing that. I think you can have a pretty meaningful impact at the local level.
Yeah, I think that's why there's there's so much of an emphasis, I think, recently with touching on journalism aspect, uh, like on preserving local newspapers and local media and how important they are to communicating to the communities what is actually going on and what is actually going to be affecting them. Because because national organizations are great, they cover amazing things, but to get more specific and like more, I guess, closer to home aspects and day-to-day things that actually affect you. You mostly see that in your local papers. And it's I think it kind of also reflects how, people have kind of gone away from the interest of local and state politics and the investment in that to federal, as well as kind of the shift from local media to more national media. But that's a whole different topic.
Sure. I mean, I think so. I mean, I guess in a way to bring it back to the budget
Yeah.
from there, I mean, in terms of how you can try to sort of stay, I guess, try to stay in the know. I mean, like you said, I think that there are issues with, sometimes trying to make direct comparisons in the budget, trying to understand where the increases are when they aren't. But I think, hopefully that's where local reporters, not just,
Yeah.
LPM, but WDRB, WHAS, your television news stations, the Courier Journal, they're all going to have folks who cover City Hall and the mayor's office, and they're going to be able to tell you, what some of the changes are in the budget. Being involved in community groups who, particularly ones that try to get city funding, they're going to know sort of in their specific issue areas. There was a big push by different groups that are sort of involved in housing in Louisville to get a bigger commitment to affordable housing and to eviction prevention. They're going to know what's in the budget, what isn't in the budget, what they would like to see. And yeah, I mean, I think, watching, as you said, the mayor's budget presentation in April, he gives a big speech to Metro Council when they first put out the budget. Watching some of those budget hearings, if you're interested in a specific issue area, watching some of Metro Council's budget hearings, showing up to the public community meeting. The Metro Council members this year, I think many of them had meetings in their own district, which is kind
Yeah, I
of
saw some of those
even,
too.
yeah, it's even easier. Ostensibly, if you're in that district, then that community meeting is going to be close to you and where you live. So, yeah, I think staying engaged and staying part of the process is something that journalists try to do. I mean, that's why we're here to try to keep the public informed so they can be engaged. But there's a lot of different ways that you can be engaged. I think, like I said earlier, I mean, I think that the city and elected officials can do a better job of making it easier to be engaged. But with a little bit of work, I think you can kind of stay in the know and stay engaged on the budget.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I agree. It's you people kind of want a little bit of like a you need to give a little bit more of a push to yourself in order to kind of get into the know sometimes. I mean, it's not like the most ideal thing, but it takes, you got to look into like your community and like that's how you become invested in it. Um and I think for my last question for you, we've kind of talked about what the mayor proposed and then all these changes and so on and so forth, but kind of getting back to the original thing, um, this is his first budget proposal as mayor. How does this line, does any of it line up with the campaign promises and expectations kind of set forth from like the campaign process, like are we seeing any of that translated into the budget?
Yeah.
And because that's a important thing that, you know, they that should be talked about in
Yeah.
terms of campaign to actually being in charge.
Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways, yes. In other ways, maybe not necessarily. So, I would say, for example, the increase in the LMPD budget, the increase in funding for some sort of non-police responses, some things that are sort of more youth programming, things that are more sort of related to public safety, but not specifically, traditionally what you would think about in public safety. There were some increased investments there. I think, perhaps there could be more. For example, the LMPD and the community. Obviously, there's a rift there following the police killing of Breonna Taylor. The most recent DOJ report underscoring racist policing practices and violating residents' rights. There was an increase. It was a doubling of LMPD's community engagement budget, but it was a doubling from $50,000 to $100,000. So it's like, is there progress? Yes. In the context of a $1.1 billion budget, is that a lot? No. Is it adequate? I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
Um, One thing that I was interested to not see really in the budget was the mayor has made a big priority about universal pre-K, and that's not something that I think the city is going to be able to fund on its own. That's definitely something that's going to take a state effort as well. But I didn't necessarily see anything that moves us towards that specific goal. Trying to just run down. I covered the mayor's campaign as well, so I can remember some of the promises
Gosh, I'm not.
um, that were made. I mean, there was a promise about 15,000 affordable housing units, which would really give us. I mean, that would really get us moving in a great direction on affordable housing. I think the 2019 housing needs assessment by the city found that there was about 31,000. There was a need of 31,000 affordable housing units for the city's poorest residents. So 15,000 affordable housing units would be great. And he's promised to do that in the first 4 years. Um, does an increase of $5 million to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund get us there? No. Is it moving in the right direction? Sure, but it's going to take a lot more money than that.
Baby steps.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, sure. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of some of the other promises that he made. I mean, I think that the investments in deferred maintenance for public
Yeah.
parks in an equitable way underscores some of his promises around the city's equity goals. And I remember talking a lot about Mayor Greenberg, talking to Mayor Greenberg a lot about the need to expand public transit and sort of non-vehicle options, pedestrian infrastructure. I think maybe that is kind of a key place where this budget doesn't necessarily seem to move in any sort of new or interesting direction as it relates to um, pedestrian infrastructure. But yeah, maybe there's some state funding coming that'll help with some of. I mean, there's a lot of redesigns
Yeah.
of streets that are in the works and that have been in the works for years. So those things will still be coming, and yeah, maybe there'll be some a windfall of money from the state to help us out with that. But so yeah, I mean, it's a mixed bag, but it always kind of is. Like I said, there's a lot of things. Um, Wanting to fund one priority sometimes means not being able to put as
Yeah.
much towards the next priority. So um, yeah, we'll just have to see where we end up, I guess.
Yeah. It's very interesting to see some things pop up and then some things not and kind of see, like, huh, I I guess I get it. But like,
Yeah,
yeah, we're yeah, that kind of deal.
yeah. Well,
Um,
and like I said, I think not everything is budget related. I think budget season is when some of the most important decisions happen every year with local government because if you get outside of the budget season and you say, oh, I want a bunch of money for this, it's like, Well, that's not in the budget. So there's a lot of, I think some of the most important decisions happen during budget season, as it relates to our local government, but there are also a lot of things that happen, in terms of how the city decides to spend the resources that it
Yeah.
gets from the budget, policies and priorities for the city. Those are things and conversations that are happening outside of budget season. And I think that's kind of the important part about staying engaged, sort of long term, is that, it's not necessarily always like you have one shot and then it's gone.
Yeah.
There's time to continue to push, for whatever it is you want to advocate for.
Yeah, it's making sure you keep your elected officials kind of in check, I guess.
Yeah.
It's a good
And make sure, yeah, make sure if
sure
they
that they're actually,
prioritize. Oh,
yeah, make
sorry.
sure that they're actually implementing
Yeah,
policies
exactly.
and the programs that they've said that they would, as well as like that you feel like they need to. Uh,
Yeah.
but sorry.
Budgets, yeah, no, I was just gonna say, yeah, I mean, 100% what you just said. Budgets are, a commitment to say, I expect that I'm gonna spend this amount of money on this department or this priority. Um, but it's not, it's a commitment to spend it in a specific way, but it doesn't mean that they're gonna spend it. There is, for example, there's a bunch of money, LMPD budget's a lot of money, for it's different positions within the department, different like for police officers. But because they've had an officer shortage, they haven't been spending that money on officers. So, there's always a commitment with a budget to spend money in a certain way. But it doesn't hurt for the public to sort of stay on our elected
Yeah,
officials and make sure that they do spend that money and they do, spend it on the priorities that they've said, they're going to spend it on.
yeah. So as we begin to wrap up here, I guess, do you have any kind of like culminating thoughts or just like kind of your general overview of kind of like what was the like main takeaway, I guess, in a sense of like this budget and kind of how it all kind of went down this year? Like if you had to sum it up, how would you do so? Which is always a fantastic question to ask a journalist.
Yeah, I mean, we just spent like 2 or 3 months on this, so I could talk forever. But I think, looking at the budget, I think it's clear that kind of what came out of the final budget, which is kind of the combined priorities of Metro Council and Mayor Craig Greenberg. I think what came out is, public safety, is going to continue to be a top priority. I think, Metro Council, Mayor Greenberg, elected officials in Louisville all believe that, if people don't, feel safe, and if they aren't actually safe, then none of the other spending on roadways, on public parks, none of that is going to mean anything. So, I think the budget showed that the main concern is going to continue to be public safety. There's sort of a renewed focus on, our public parks and our public spaces. Um, there has been for years, a big push by Metro Council, to get more money in the budget for roadway paving. I think fundamentally that's one of the main things that people care about when it comes to local government, is whether or not, the roads are good quality and in good condition when people have to get to and from work and to and from where they're going. I think they moved, in a good direction on that this year in terms of getting, a record level of funding for roadway repaving. Um, and yeah, I would say, that there was some commitment to more, youth programming, expanding community center hours. But I think you're still going to see a big push from folks in the community, to get more funding for social programs, for city services, for kids getting access to, not only programming but mental health counseling and just positive experiences, particularly, if kids continue to be sort of disproportionately involved in some of the violence we've seen in the city. I think that there's going to be a continued push for that, but I think the budget did sort of move in the right direction in terms of increasing funding for some of those non-police related things that do, improve public safety. And improve the community for young people. So, yeah, I don't know if that was summed up
That does. I mean, that
very
basically
succinctly,
gives a
but
good
yeah,
overview of kind of like what actually, you know, will be affected, what will be kind of like what will we see within the community. So I think that was great. You did a great job.
cool.
That was perfect. 10 out of 10. But do you have any last thoughts, kind of anything you wanted to say but didn't get to say? The floor is yours then, if so.
Um, no, I mean, I guess I would just reiterate that I think, local politics is really important. I think um you have the ability because unfortunately so few people really pay attention and are engaged in local politics. I think, if you do that, you have a really outsized ability to be able to influence local policy, where money gets spent in a budget. And I think one of the best ways to do that is, you obviously can advocate as an individual, but I think one of the best ways to do that is with other people who sort of share the same opinions and beliefs as you do. So there are so many good advocacy organizations that we have here in Louisville, whether it's on the issue of housing, on the issue of public parks, on the issue of transit, bikes, pedestrian infrastructure, local businesses, all of these things. No matter what your like interest is or your specific issue area, I would recommend getting involved with other people. And yeah, just I think just staying engaged in the process. Um, yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's it. I know I'm obviously speaking to folks in the local party, but
No,
yeah, I'm just
no,
saying
it's a
that I think that there are a lot of
yeah.
organizations
No, I
outside
think
of just the
it's
party.
a
Yeah.
good I think that is a good point, and it kind of reminds people to that, sometimes a collective is more effective than just a singular voice sometimes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this may be one of those instances. And also to kind of diversify how you're getting involved, because it's a good way to meet people, as well as like it's another way to get involved and kind
Yeah.
of do what you enjoy and kind of
Yes.
push things that you believe forward.
Yeah.
Um,
And I will say one last thing,
yeah, no,
support local journalism because
yes,
the New York Times, the Washington Post, all great organizations, but like national news outlets are not sending people to Louisville or to wherever, if you're part of
yeah,
an independent city, they're not sending folks to cover your local meetings where all these
yeah,
important issues are getting held. The folks who are doing that are in local media. And, like you said, those opportunities for funding are few and far between. So the best way to stay engaged is really through local journalism, and we need the support of people to be able to continue to do that.
yeah. I 100% agree. I think it's imperative to make sure that people know what's going on. And the people who do that are the people on the ground, the local journalists. And y'all do amazing work. And I wish I could live up to your guys' success and everything. So if people are interested in kind of seeing any of your stories, articles, social medias, where can they find you?
Yeah, I mean, my stuff and all the other really talented people that work at WFPL, we're at lpm.org/news. That'll take you directly to like the NPR news stuff. We also have a classical music station, WFPK. We have a lot of stuff going on, but yeah, lpm.org/news for all of the articles from me and from my colleagues. And then if you want to follow me personally on Twitter, I'm at by Roberto R.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much for coming onto our Zoom here with so much fun difficulty, technical difficulties at the beginning. Really appreciate it and giving kind of your insight on the budget process and how that all works. Really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll be back soon with another fun little community event engaging people in our democracy.